have cited, I'll go just through very quickly, 7 of the 9 criteria that we have to look at when nominating. And just so you know, a building only has to meet 1 of the criteria. We felt that this building was extraordinary and met 7 of them. I think the most important thing to say is that this building is a landmark already. And although it should not be a consideration of whether it's landmark eligible, I think I will bring it up anyways. As an architect and director of facilities for the Buffalo Public Schools, someone who knows old buildings, I have looked at a lot of the estimates and have worked with parishioners in developing other estimates. And we do feel that many of the estimates and the rationale for demolition, for requesting demolition for St. Anne's are unwarranted. One little thing, I think that the footprint of the building is 22,000 square foot, and the major portion is one of the towers, which does have some structural issues and do have to be addressed. But if we have a footprint of 22,000 square feet, that one tower has a footprint of 297 square feet, which is 1.35% of the building. And I think the sacrifice of an incredible building, which in my opinion, and I've been all over the world, matches some of the great cathedrals in Europe, this building does not warrant demolition. Therefore, also I've been in the building about 6 weeks ago. We had over 3 inches of rain on Saturday. Very little water was coming into the building. In fact, I did not see any water coming into the building. And as you know, we had some quite windy days the past few days. And Marty ever reminds me, the only thing that blew over were the barricades around the church. So again, we thank you for your support. And this is one of the, I think, the easy recommendations that we make to this honorable body. So we thank you for your support.
Thank you, sir. Actually, these chambers are not supposed to pause for applause, but because I have a sister up there who trumps a pastor, she says you ought to clap. We're just being quiet because Joe Lomax knows about the ruler in the hand. So.
Thank you. My name is Martin Ederer. I am co-chair of the Revitalization Committee for St. Anne's. Just a quick update. Since the last time we met here, there has been a lane closure on Broadway because of problems, which nothing had changed on the building, but the lane was closed. And then after that, all the locks on all the buildings were changed. We have also had a meeting with the diocese. Would stay on, but we also got no assurances that the interior would remain intact. We already know all about the hangings, no damage to anything but the barricades. And aside from that, I think we need to thank all of you for your support. And once again, what will we be? Builders and restorers or destroyers? And I think we already know how most of us want to vote on that. So there's not much more to say except to thank you, and let's try to keep as much of the fabric of Buffalo as intact as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sister, if you clap, they're going to clap.
Good afternoon. My name is John Solitz, and I want to thank you for allowing me to speak before you again today. We, the people of St. Anne's, need you, the Common Council of Buffalo, to do your job. We need you to partner with us to vote to landmark this East Side icon. In doing so, you open the doors to much-needed funding to ensure the survival for many decades to come. The last time before you, I told you how their number at $1.2 million for the plaster was overinflated, and that a more qualified plasterer says he's looking at less than $100,000. This is a man that does work in many churches, has done work in many churches. Okay. Let's talk about the towers briefly. Their numbers range from 2.7 to 5.6 million dollars. Our number for removing the bad tower and making it look like the picture that's been passed out to you today, okay, is around $500,000. It's not a totally firm number because we can't get in to take the measurements. And it's an accurate number. And that's in line with one of their contractors who submitted a proposal in the package. This would take care of 95% of the structural problem on campus. 95% of it. While these numbers don't fit our household budgets, we're not talking about fixing our home, but rather a house of God, a structure of great significance to the Broadway-Fillmore area, the east side of Buffalo, and the entire city and surrounding area of Buffalo and western New York. This church matters because it was the largest Catholic school in the country at one time. The church was bought and paid for by its people the day it opened the very first time. It was built by its parishioners, not by contractors. We, the people of St. Anne's, realize that there's maintenance issues going forward. Every building has that. We are up to the task. After all, some of our relatives, including mine, were there when it was built in the 1880s. Our only concern, we're confident that we can raise the money. We have no problems with that. Our only concern is that there be a system created to administer the funds according to the oversight of St. Anne's Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir?
My name is Tom Yatz. I'm the Executive Director of Preservation Buffalo Niagara. Chairman Pridgeon and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you about St. Anne's. I also gave to you a letter dated September 19th that Preservation Buffalo Niagara sent to the Preservation Board in support of this nomination. I don't really think I have to say this, but I will, that Buffalo has a treasure of historic churches, and there are many jewels in that treasure. But if there is a crown jewel in the treasure, I think we know that it's St. Anne's. And everyone in this room knows how important architecturally that building is with its magnificent and beautifully preserved interior. And we know the historic significance that it has played on our east side. And the century-long, more than a century, association with both the ethnic communities and all immigrants who have come into this community, who work together to build not only that church, but to build the city of Buffalo. Right now, Preservation Buffalo Niagara is working collaboratively with the city, with the Diocese of Buffalo to find an appropriate developer to take this project on and to take these buildings on and make them once again be able to be a part of the community. We actually did receive assurance from the diocese that they would not start to dismantle the interior until we went through this process of bringing developers through there, because one of the things that's very important is that the building remain intact in order for it to have a future use. We have had multiple developers through the property, and tomorrow morning I am bringing another person through who has been there once before. She's coming again with her architect. She's a developer who did a similar project in Rochester and is very much interested in St. Anne's. Quite honestly, she thought the condition was much better than what she expected. So when you vote today, this is a major step in protecting the integrity of St. Anne's, because every one of these developers who have come through with us have told us that they need the tax credits or grants in order to make this project work. Once St. Anne's is starting to be demolished, the chances of that integrity remaining are very slim. So it's very important for you to vote today to protect St. Anne's so that it will be able to have the appropriate development that should take place there. So I urge you to step forward today to join the momentum of all the people that are here in this room, and that we all work together to save St. Anne's and make it once again a major contributing force in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Dana Saylor, and I'm a resident of the Fillmore District, and I wanted to just add my voice and say I just returned from the National Preservation Conference in Indianapolis, and I've attended 3 preservation conferences, the first being in Buffalo in 2011. And I just wanted to state that people attending in Indianapolis from across the country came up to me because they heard that I was one of the people who was there from Buffalo. They couldn't say enough about the city, about its people, but especially about its historic architecture and how good of a job Buffalo has done in preserving its historic architecture and how important that is to maintaining the fabric and the interest of visitors and of people who want to live and work in historic places. So I just wanted to add that and make sure that people knew In particular, one gentleman from Astoria, Oregon, planned a trip to Buffalo with his wife and then toured all of upstate New York afterwards because he was so impressed with Buffalo. And that was a story that kept being repeated, and about 2,000 attendees were there, and every single person was acknowledging the amazing characteristics that Buffalo has. So I just want to say that that's what makes us special and unique, and what makes us stand out, and what we should continue to celebrate.
Thank you. If we're okay, we'll go to the council members, and then we'll get this vote going. Councilmember Franzak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I was proud, along with you, to be a co-sponsor of this very necessary resolution that gives hope to a community by keeping a very important structure alive, but you have the living will of the parishioners that are here. And as Ms. Saylor mentioned and Tom Yacht spoke earlier, they're at the Preservation Conference in Indianapolis, which I also attended, and I had a nice conversation with Mr. Yeager, Robert Yeager, the partner for Sacred Places, and I talked to Dr. Ederer, who also spoke. The key of what the partner for Sacred Places do is they keep the worshiping parish, the worshiping community in the building. They work to do that because, you know, they're going to landmark this very important building historically. The best case scenario is, you know, if we lose the parish and we save the building for development, well, that's a victory too. But the true victory, the deepest victory, is to keep the parish there. And what this organization does, located in Philadelphia, and ironically, one of the people employed there was an intern in my office some years ago, is to keep the parish alive there. Now, I know that an appeal that goes beyond Buffalo, the Buffalo Diocese, is the Vatican. So I know that, I don't know all the particulars of it, but we did, myself and Councilman Bloombeck did send some letters that Dr. Ederer compiled to send to the Vatican about how it's so important to keep these places alive, because, you know, the purpose, at least we're not theologians, you are, but the purpose is to promote and to proselytize and so forth, and you know, our job here is to strengthen the city, and the places like St. Anne's and their parish community strengthens our communities. It's as clear, it's not through a glass darkly, it's as clear as you could possibly see the situation. So they have faith, and we have faith a good outcome can come from this. And we're hoping that they have, like St. Paul on the road to Tarsus, we hope that the diocese has that epiphany, where that light hits them and they fall off the horse and they realize that they want to stand with the...
I think you are a theologian.
Yeah, well, we could talk about that later. But I just wanted to say that also one thing that Dr. Ederer said that I would like to find out from Public Works if they had permission to close that street into one lane. Because I would think somebody keeps taking down the St. Anne's sign. They keep removing that, but I think to close a part of the street, you need to have the involvement and the permission of Public Works. I'm not sure that would count. So, if you start stripping and removing things, you are subject to inspection. You can't start stripping and then removing.
Absolutely.
So that's all.
So we ask that council staff would check and then let us know about that street closure. For the record, is there anyone present who has not spoken who is in opposition of the landmark status? Okay, so that has been spoken and questioned on the record. There is no one here from the diocese. There is no one here in opposition. And so folks, I won't call it a battle because it's not a battle. First of all, this is not a battle against the diocese. I think that at least for me, it's not about the diocese. It is about probably one of the most beautiful buildings that is not just beautiful in its facilities, but in the amount of people that it has helped on that side of town, if not in the entire city, of the significant architects who have worked on this building, and the tremendous amount of help, whether it was food or whether it was clothing or whether it was prayer, whether it was teachers, that St. Anne's has brought to the city of Buffalo. It is important. It is important to this council, obviously. Our majority leader has stated As I spoke to someone earlier, and I don't know if they're still in the chamber, whose dad actually put the lights in St. Anne's, and it is he still here? And so it is, can you come down for 1 second? Your dad put the lights in, what was it? Your grandfather, come on down, if you state your name for the record, and we'll end with this, whose grandfather actually placed the lights in St. Anne, I think is important. If you just state your name for the record and tell us what you were telling me.
Yes, my name is James Herr. My grandparents lived across the street from the convent of St. Anne. My grandfather put the lights in that are on the altar for the high mass and stuff, and he maintained them, and I believe my uncles did too. So,
thank you for being here. Councilman Revere?
Motion is to approve. Motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close public hearing, second by Councilmember Golombek.
Motion is now to approve the application for landmark status for St. Anne's Church and Shrine.
Motion is to approve the landmark status. Councilman Franzak? Second by Councilmember Franzak. So be it. Thank you. You want to do roll call? I wish I had you all on Sunday morning. Councilmember Franzak has requested roll call, and I'm fine with that.
Council President Fontana?
Yes.
Councilmember Franze?
Yes.
Councilmember Golumback?
Yes.
Councilmember Luperto?
Yes.
Councilmember Pridgen?
Amen. I mean, yes.
Councilmember Rivera?
Yes.
Councilmember Russell? Councilmember Scanlon? Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Done. Thank you all. Next item.
Item 2.
And you all can, well, I can do the benediction, or I can dismiss you, or I can...
Pass the plate.
I'll give a few seconds for them to be able to, so that the next item will be able to hear. Thank you, council members. Great work. Great work. Next item.
Item 2, food store license, 2756 Bailey.
Motion.
Motion refer without rec.
Motion sent without recommendation.
Motion is without rec, second by Majority Leader Smith.
Item 3, food store license, 441 Fillmore.
Motion to table
Motion.
items 3 and 4.
Motion is table items 3 and 4, second by Councilmember Franzak, who has the floor.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if the gentlemen are here for 441 Fillmore. I told them, oh.
Yes.
Somebody.
Oh.
Ohio? No, that's Sam, that's a food store. That's Ohio.
You're not
No,
Fillmore
Sam
unless
is
you come in.
That's Ohio. I told these gentlemen here, where I suggested they come in. It's not a bad store. It's maybe we should send it without rec, but I asked them, I told them to come in today. Maybe they got messed up because of the holiday, election day.
That's item number 4.
That's item number 3. 441 Fillmore, the store. Let's send it without rec, perhaps, and then I'll tell them again. And,
Okay.
It's something I think we'll approve because he sent me an email, he sent me all the pictures, and he repeated what I've been saying, that why can't these stores look like a 7-Eleven or a Wilson Farm? And it kind of looks pretty good, so
No one
I
here
really
for
don't see any reason why
441.
we can't approve it, really. I know they're
Up
not
to you.
here, but,
You want to send it without rec?
well,
and
let's
then-
send it without rec. I'll
Okay.
talk to them one more time, and then probably with an eye toward approval.
Okay.
Thank you.
Motion is now to send item 3
So-
without recommendation.
Send item 3 without recommendation, second by Councilmember Franzak. Next item.
Item 4, city charter property maintenance.
Motion to table.
Motion is table, second by Council President Fontana.
Item 5, notice of appeal, 441 Ohio.
Items open.
This item is open, and I know Paul is here, and Ms. Savarino is here. I have you both, Paul, you want to come down and start, or then whoever's close to the mic? And then we have to get an opinion from Corporation Counsel about whether this needs to be a public hearing or not, or schedule a public hearing for this. All right, so Ms. Savarino is coming because it is his appeal. 441 Ohio Street. You get your mic on and staff is coming over.
There we go.
Yep.
We have some,
Just state your name for the record.
Sam Savarino, Savarino Companies, one of the owners of the project, or the property in question, 441 Ohio Street, also known as 9 South Street. I believe we have some stuff on the screen for you to look at. It's going to be a little difficult for you, Councilman Pridgen, I think.
All right, is that this?
That's that.
Okay. Are you going through this entire PowerPoint? I'm going to suggest, let me, hold on, because I don't want to,
How about I
say
cut to
don't want
the
to hear it
chase with
twice.
some of these?
But are we going to have a public hearing on this?
No, the appellant has waived public hearing. This is a hearing that the public will not participate in, but the Preservation Board and Mr. Savarino are now being heard before this committee.
Okay.
The decision. There's no publication, there's no
All right.
no further.
It doesn't have to.
Go ahead, no, come on.
There does not have to be a advertised public hearing, because we did the same thing with
Okay.
Palladino.
So we don't have to have an advertised public hearing, and you're going to present, I'll just state for the record, we do have a copy of this for the record.
Yes,
this,
you do.
PowerPoint that we'll enter into the record, and we'll give you the floor and just,
I don't want to have to bring you through the whole thing. If you don't want to hear it, you certainly know about it. But I'll let the record stand. But we're here in front of you today, and I'm with Kevin Hayes from my office and Kerry Trainer from KTA Preservation Consultants, who's the person who authored the original landmark nomination for this property. We are here to ask for an appeal of the decision of the Preservation Board not to grant us a certificate of exception for the property. And our appeal is based on a couple of things. In my opinion, it's based on common sense. The record is pretty clear that there's not a lot worth saving out there presently. The building is deteriorated to a point where it's beyond salvation. It has already been compromised historically long before we came on the scene. And even Kerry, who authored the landmark nomination, says that the condition of the building is such that it would not meet landmark status from the National Park Service. There's not enough out there worth saving. At one time, there was a rush to landmark this building. Well, let me bring you through the timeline. I'm going to go back to the first screen. In late 2011, the building was condemned by the city of Buffalo. It had been deteriorating for years, had several collapses. The city declared it unsafe and unfit for use. Immediately, the owner of the property was forced out of the building. We bought the property. We entered into a binding cash agreement for it in late 2011. Subsequent to that, it was nominated as a landmark and approved unanimously by the Preservation Board. I showed up at that meeting. We had not yet closed on the agreement, even though it was a binding commitment and a cash sale, and did counsel the Preservation Board, or asked them to suspend any decision on there until the condition of the building could be ascertained. It was in a state of collapse in a lot of areas. It was condemned. People weren't allowed in it. It was just difficult to do an assessment. But we promised to be fair. The answer I got back was that wasn't going to be considered because they thought that the circumstances were extenuating, and it might have been very likely that the city would have ordered us to take it down in an emergency demolition given its condition. Subsequent to that, we spent a lot of time, effort, money, and resources trying to find a way to make that building work, to see if any portions of it could be salvaged in whole or in part, and whether tax credits could be used to make any beneficial use of that building. After all the reports that we put through, the conclusion that we came to was that it was not feasible. We eventually entered into an agreement with Preservation Buffalo Niagara where they would exercise some stewardship on the disassembly of that building and saving whatever structural elements, any parts of the building that could be salvaged. And we would either try to use those elements in our new construction or to inventory them and maybe out of pieces and parts someplace at some other time construct something that was at least representative of the Freight House. We allowed a third-party engineer of Preservation Buffalo Niagara's choosing to come in and do an independent assessment of the building about whether it was salvageable in whole or in part. The conclusion they came to, that was Peter Grace from Syracuse Engineers, was that it was not. And they brought up several other findings that we had not come upon earlier. One was that the nature of the construction and the way that building was constructed was such that the columns did not meet between the first and the second floor. Simply put, it was constructed like a house of cards, certainly would not meet modern building codes, and certainly would not hold up the lateral stresses. The building, in its best case, would have to be disassembled and couldn't be assembled back in the same fashion again. The roof has got asbestos-containing building materials adhered to it. There's no way to take it off, and there's no easy way to take the roof off either. There's simply not enough out there worth saving. We engaged Carrie Trainer from KTA Preservation Consultants to go and look at this. Carrie can speak for herself, but she came to the conclusion that what's out there right now would not qualify for landmark status, and she wouldn't do a landmark nomination for what's out there right now. Because we have to go through the Army Corps of Engineers, because we're on the water, SHPO is governing our actions out there, both with salvaging what we can salvage out of that building, using what can be used in the construction, and keeping whatever can be kept on that site intact as it was, as some sort of a relic in part. So there is some governmental oversight with what we're doing out there. I think it's reasonable what we're proposing out here. We want to save what can be saved out of there at our expense, and then construct a new facility in its place. And the final design of that structure will have to meet the scrutiny of SHPO to make sure that it's proper and fitting for a landmark site.
Anybody else want to speak? And can we bring up the picture of the structure presently?
Carrie Trainer, KTA Preservation Specialist. I wrote the landmark application for this building back in 2011. At that period in time, a portion of the roof in the central part of the building collapsed. There remains sufficient integrity to convey meaning. This building tells a story. It is important. I'm not arguing that. It tells a story that has to do with the period in time of transshipment. What's unfortunate, when I went back into this building to actually try to convince Sam to save it, that it could be reused, it was awful. It was unsafe. You had to be very careful where you walked. I went in days before rain and after rain. The deterioration was so bad that you could not walk in part of the building. My point of view changed, and there are parts that can be repurposed, reused, specifically the beams that are iron that date to 1868. They're intact. They offer potential. My charge now, because there is not enough left to convey meaning. There is not enough left to meet the integrity criteria of the National Register eligibility requirements, specifically when the new structure has to go in, or the middle portion that Peter Grace determined needs to be demolished. Meaning cannot be conveyed. The historic meaning is lost. There is not enough integrity to meet the National Register eligibility requirements, and the local landmark requirements then are also compromised. So in good conscience, I would not rewrite that application today. That said, there is opportunity to salvage that. And that's important, because the meaning that this building has, I think, can be told through some sort of mitigation or didactic that allows people to understand its point in time. But the building itself, it doesn't do it.
I'd also like to state that, our proposed new design for the site, which one of the slides you have up there shows it, has received a unanimous approval by the City Planning Board. However, the final design will be influenced by Chippo's comments on there. And I will also say that one of the things that we're doing over there is we're preserving the existing foundation wall of the building. We're pulling the new building back from the edge of the water, which is met with the approval of Riverkeeper. We're pulling it back 25 feet, which was a requirement that they had, and they're actually part of our design team. And we're preserving the existing foundation wall where it meets the Buffalo River. We're leaving the piers that are out there intact as they are right now. We're going to see if we can use some existing elements of the building, whether it be for decorative purposes, perhaps in some areas for structural purposes, although I must say that's highly unlikely with the new design. So we're trying to be as careful and considerate as we can with this site. But I will state again that in no way can this building be repurposed and reused. It's just simply not reasonable. If this was a car wreck, I would say it would be totaled. And we're saying that not because we came to that conclusion because we wanted to come over and replace the building. Our first inclination was to reuse the building and utilize tax credits, if only for a portion of it. That just is not feasible. And as I said before, the building is compromised. If you divided it into thirds, the north third has already been historically compromised. The roof has been taken off it. The original structure is gone. The southern third has been gutted from the inside. The first and the second floors have been removed for a truck dock. And the only part that could be said to have any structural integrity back to the way it was originally designed and originally constructed is the center, and that is almost totally collapsed at this point in time. There's simply nothing there to save. So we're asking for on an appeal to overturn the decision of the Buffalo Preservation Board.
All right, we'll hear from the Buffalo Preservation Board.
Good afternoon, Paul McDonald, Chairman of the Buffalo Preservation Board. Yes, this building came to us originally in 2011. It was an application by an outside entity to propose landmarking, and we did support, as Mr. Savarino said, unanimously. I know he has done a lot of work to try to reuse the building. It came back to us, his request for demolition, a few weeks ago, and his request was rejected by a 5-2. Basically, the reasons we felt this building was historic, and it was based on a report given to us in 2011. 5 of the criteria to the National Register, as I said, we only really have to act upon 1, but we felt it met 5 of them according to the report. Has character, interest, or value as part of the development heritage of the city, state, or nation. It exemplifies historic, aesthetic, architectural, archaeological, education, economic, or cultural heritage of the city. It embodies distinguishing characteristic and architectural style valuable for the study of a period, type, method of construction. It embodies elements of design, detailing, material, craftsmanship that render it architecturally significant. It has a unique location or contains singular characteristics that make it an established or familiar visual feature within the city. And it is the last of the freight houses on the canal in western New York. So we felt it still was an historic building. Thank you.
Terrence Robinson. I'm a founding member and vice president of Preservation Buffalo Niagara, and I'm also a member of the City of Buffalo Preservation Board. As Chairman McDonald alluded to, I was one of the 2 votes in favor of the request for a certificate of exception. The freight house is an outstanding example of the period. My impression when I walked in was that it was a cathedral of commerce, magnificent building. But the realities of its condition, etc., are what they are. I think that it was totally appropriate to landmark the structure because it is a historic structure. It is a landmark. The landmark designation really does nothing but acknowledge a fact that already exists. It is a landmark. Notwithstanding all of those facts, Mr. Savarino came before the Preservation Board with a request for a certificate of exception. A certificate of exception within the preservation ordinance of the City of Buffalo requires that the applicant demonstrate two facts. The first fact being the historic significance of the structure. That is without question. The second fact is that it would present a hardship in order to redevelop, reconstruct, remove, or preserve the structure in situ. Mr. Savarino did an incredible amount of due diligence in seeking to determine the condition of the building and alternatives for its use. I think, and in my opinion at that time, he more than ably demonstrated the second criteria, the hardship. Those were the only two considerations that were really appropriate for our consideration. Consequently, I voted to grant the certificate of exception. In addition to all of the controversies and legitimate dispute regarding issues like this, it's important to keep in mind the appropriate process, the statutory limitations on our actions, and the actions on this body as a board of review to act in accordance with the statute. The statute, notwithstanding my passion for the building, the 1860s, and the regret in seeing perhaps that last vestige removed from the waterfront, were to some extent irrelevant. So the statute, in my opinion, supports Mr. Savarino's request for a certificate of exception, and I think that his appeal to this body is totally appropriate.
All right. Councilman President, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that it was, in fact, it was this body that supported, I was a sponsor, co-sponsor of a resolution in support of landmarking that was subsequently done by the Preservation Board, and I think that the Preservation Board was totally appropriate, as Mr. McDonald said, and as Mr. Robinson said, because it met the necessary criterion. And the purpose of the Preservation Board is to preserve. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what their charter is, to preserve. Now, we, as the body that's being appealed to, look at it legally and also in its totality. We look at the whole picture of the situation. And so it's really hard to, when Mr. Savarino showed you these slides, it's hard unless you're right on site. So I went inside this building, I toured this building with myself and my staff and Mr. Savarino and his assistant, and we spent quite a long time in the building, walking through the building, with flashlights and trying to avoid holes and things of that nature. And in this report, it talks about several minor and several major areas of collapse, which is in fact true. Even to the untrained eye, to a non-engineer architect, and we have the report from these various entities, Syracuse engineers and others, and the involvement of Mr. Yachts and the Preservation Buffalo Niagara, whose charter is to preserve. And that's our charter, and that's our inclination as well. Now, having seen this firsthand through this building, we were there, it seemed like at least an hour, looking at every part of this building. These descriptions are in fact true. There are numerous, they say several, but I noticed numerous minor and major areas of collapse where there's non-existent portions of the structure in its entirety and much of it is rubble. Notwithstanding, you know, in 1860s, the name of the parade house is left. The building, I would say left in its own current devices would be unlikely to be repurposed as is, in situ, as is. So, and this is what we've heard from the developer. So that, to the untrained eye, seeing in a very advanced state of decay and dilapidation, where, you know, you could not get tax credits for it because of that, what could be done? So we did have what we'll call a charrette at the old First Ward Community Center, where Mr. Savarino presented his housing project to wide support in the community. Because you're taking something that, and I would assume for Mr. Savarino that if you can't do what you want here, you probably do nothing, I would presume. You move to another project, or still there.
Right.
So that's it. You wouldn't probably work with what you got.
No, we wouldn't. There's no other suitable use for that. There's nothing that can be done. There's no way to ameliorate the conditions save for demolition.
Yeah, I can tell you it is in a considerable state of deterioration. I mean, just from my own eye walking, there's no question of that. Now we know that Mr. Savarino has done excellent rehab projects in today's Buffalo News, in case in point with the livery. You couldn't do a livery-style project here, could you?
No.
A council member has to look at the entire picture. We do support preservation. However, in this case, I would just see a continuation of this type of virtual rubble staying there like ad infinitum. The place would probably collapse on itself before too long. Some of it's collapsed into the Buffalo River. This is not like a St. Anne situation. It's completely different. And it's not like many other preservation projects that we approve and support. And I do not criticize the preservation. In fact, I've appointed many of those members who voted for this, and I applaud them because they did what they were supposed to do in their charter. Now we have to act in the interest, in the wider interest, based on the facts presented before us by the Preservation Board, and we look at the letter of appeal, and the letter of appeal to me seems reasonable. Mr. Savarino's letter to me seems reasonable, asking us that we accept the appeal. So that would be my recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can we move on? The motion is now to approve the appeal to the Preservation Board's decision to deny demolition permit. The motion is now to approve the appeal.
Motion. Councilman Franklin.
Just one more point. I just wanted to make out, I neglected to say, and I mentioned this to Mr. Savarino and others, that the interior of the structure has rather remarkable beams, you know, post-bellum, after Civil War wooden beams and metal brackets that I think are quite an interesting architectural feature and unique. And I would ask that if we approve this, that Mr. Savarino saves these, as many as possible, and incorporate them in some kind of feature or application to the new building that he wants to build, that I think will be a great asset to the old First Ward. So I have mentioned, I don't know if he wants to address that.
Yes, we've been on the record as saying that we would try to use, repurpose, or save as much as we could of the existing structure. And we're working with Preservation Buffalo Niagara and Kerry Trainers providing some stewardship, but we also have some oversight with our actions from SHPO. So you don't have to take our word for it. We're duty bound. And while I just have the floor, I want to make a point here. We did not apply for a demolition permit for this. We applied for a certificate of exception, which was denied by the Preservation Board. So we did not apply for a demolition permit. I think Mr. McDonald made that point. I don't know if that's accurate. So we're looking for an appeal on that. And I would just echo what Mr. Robinson said. There are specific criteria that has to be judged upon.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was just reading the letter sent to the clerk's office, which The Preservation Board on October 10, 2000 to deny certificate of exception for a demolition permit for property commonly known as Ohio. So then we're approving the appeal to that Preservation Board made to deny a certificate of exception for a demolition permit. That is what we're doing today. Am I correct?
Yes. Is that correct?
The ultimate action of the board would be either to recommend upholding or overturning the action of the Preservation Board. So either will vote to uphold the Preservation Board or you will vote to overturn the decision of the Preservation Board. Either of those motions would be in order.
Either one.
But I guess I'm confused. If he's saying it didn't apply for demolition, but this says we're overturning demolition.
Perhaps I should explain. The certificate of exception is a certificate that the Preservation Board, one of the certificates that the Preservation Board would grant to go to permits and inspection, stating, such as in a landmark district, you want to make an alteration to a building or make a change of any sort or even demolish the building, that proposed action has to be first approved by the Preservation Board. Without their certificate stating that it's an approved action on the historic structure, permits cannot issue. In this case, the applicant requested that this certificate of exception be granted so that it could tear down the building. Right. So once that certificate goes to the permits and inspections, they can issue the demolition permit. Okay. So the action here is either to uphold the Preservation Board or overturn the Preservation Board.
All right. We clear? Everybody clear?
So our motion then is to overturn the decision made by the Buffalo Preservation Board to deny a certificate of exception for demolition here.
That's correct.
Demolition for permit.
Based on number 5, right? Item 5? Based on item 5, notice of appeal? Because you have to vote on something that's before us.
Well, item 5 is the appeal paper.
Okay.
You have heard the appellant. You have heard the Preservation Board through its chair. And the argument made by the appellant is that there is no longer any historic structure to be maintained, and indeed within our preservation ordinance, within the criteria for allowing demolition of a historic building, it must be shown that essentially that it is, as Mr. Robinson said, that it is a hardship to attempt to maintain the building. So the argument here is that there is so little of the structure left that it's no longer historic and that nothing can be reasonably done at any cost.
Everybody on the same page?
Okay, so the motion then stands.
Motion stands, second by Councilmember Franzak. Next item. Have we done? Will you take care of all business?
Did you vote?
Huh? Yes, we have a roll call. Right, we don't need a roll call. Right? Majority?
You taking items off the table?
Yep, we're going to do that.
I just wanted to make sure I was finished with this item.
Yes, sir,
We're
you are.
legally sound in case got to go to court. All right.
Take from
Next
the table
item.
items 7, 8, 9, 10, and 78.
Taking from the items, all those items that Councilmember Rivera just mentioned for the title. Item 7.
Item 7, rename the former Donovan office building to One Canal Side.
Motion is to send without recommendation items 7, 8, and 9. 7, 8, and 9 without recommendation, second by Councilmember Golombek.
Item 10, public financing for City of Buffalo elections.
Items open.
This item is open. Councilmember Golombek, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank my colleagues for